All right, welcome everyone to TAM Lab number 70. Today we're excited to have Eleanor Abbiss joining us from the UK. She's going to be going through a session around how she created a custom health check specifically for her customers as it relates to NSX-T. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Eleanor.
Thank you very much. So let me share my screen and I will get started. So just a quick intro. Thanks, Steve, for that. I'm Eleanor Abbiss and I'm a UK and Ireland TAM. I've been with VMware for about a year. And I decided to do an NSX-T manual best practice review for one of my customers. And I'm going to get into that in a little bit more detail in a second. Before I do, just very quick disclaimer, this isn't supported by VMware, it's something that I completed separately on my own, so just something to be aware of if you wanted to complete this with any of your customers. So to get into it, why would I do a manual best practice review? So as I'm sure you know, there is the health check analyzer. I believe it's at version 5.5 at the moment. And you can use this to do a health check of an NSX-V environment. However, unfortunately, the API calls don't match up with NSX-V. With NSX-V and with NSX-T, so you can't use this in an NSX-T environment. So I decided that I should do one myself and create it manually. So I did this using the VMware NSX-T reference design guide. This was version 2.5. I did use this for an environment of NSX-T3, so I did have to tweak some things slightly, but it's mostly the same, so it wasn't too difficult to change. So I then condensed this into a 29-page best practice review health check. Once I've done that, I then ran an NSX-V health check analyzer tool in an NSX-V environment, just so that I could get some more general health checks. Anything I'd missed, I could then add in. So from that best practice 29-page document that I created, I then created a spreadsheet. This had a list of about 50 best practice and health checks that I'd checked through, made sure they all made sense, checked in a lab environment and everything like that. And I sectioned this out into columns. So I'm just going to show you a bit what that looks like. So as you can see, the first column is the recommendation or the best practice. Second column was just a quick note in case I forgot where to find it or anything like that, just so that I could get onto the environment really quickly and discover where it was. And then just a bit more detail about the health check in case I needed any backup information or anything like that. I'd also then color coded it. So I color coded it depending on whether it might raise questions. So for example, when it's in orange, this is more of a general talking point that you can have conversations about. The green is something that you just need to go in and check, and then you can discuss that afterwards. I then also had a third one created, which was in blue. And this blue one was more, this can be a bit more subjective, so you do have to check this a bit more carefully. So say this blue one here, this was for on a firewall. It was to check the firewall policies that they've created. So it's to put the most granular firewall policies at the top and then down into the least. So that was something you'd have to work out, obviously, depending on their specific environment. So now I've just shown you a quick overview of what I started doing. I'm going to go into the first 8 checks. I'm going to go into a bit more detail, show you the environment, and then there are 7 more that I just wanted to briefly cover. So I'm going to pop between the presentation and a lab environment. Apologies in advance, the lab environment can be slightly slow sometimes, so bear with it. Okay, so the first one we're going to get into is using the Simplified UI. So I'm just going to go into my lab environment. So as I said, it can be slow sometimes. As you can see, I'm as I'm sure you know, in the version change from 2 to 3, there is no longer the Advanced UI tab. Instead, you have the Policy and the Manager toggle in the top right-hand corner. So this isn't shown by default. If you do a fresh install, you don't get to see this toggle, but if you do an upgrade from say 2.4 or 2.5, you will see this. This is because the manager toggle is where everything from the advanced UI went, so you didn't lose any information that you'd inputted. Unfortunately, there is no tool that swaps between the manager and the policy, so you can't move anything you've created in the manager policy in the manager toggle to the policy toggle, but that is something that they're working on at the moment. So there is something I wanted to show quickly when my lab environment comes back. So we're going to go to System, and then we're going to go to User Interface Settings. So as you can see, if you go into Edit here, obviously we wouldn't actually edit the customer environment, because as a TAM, obviously that's not what we do. This is just showing the customers how they could edit it themselves. I'm not actually wouldn't make any changes. So the toggle you can change to make it visible to all users, visible to admin users, or hidden from everyone. And you can change the default mode of when you load up the NSX Manager to be in Policy or Manager. And obviously the overall recommendation here is to start when you go up to 3, make sure that everything that you configure is now in the Policy tabs, because that's where everything should be going forwards. So I'm just going to move on to the second check. So the second check is more surrounding backups. So obviously you'd start here by asking your customer if they used a backup for NSX. If they didn't, why don't they use it, etc. So if we just go into System and then Backup, I don't actually have a backup set up here, but there are some things that you can mention. So there are 3 different types of backups, obviously. There's cluster backup, which is the desired state of the virtual network. The node backup, which is a backup of the NSX Manager, just that node. There's an inventory backup, which includes the KVM hosts, etc. And so you can mention that information if you want. But the main thing here to mention is that there are 2 backup methods. So there's the manual backup method, which can be run anytime, whenever you need it, or there is the recommended method, which is automated backups. So obviously this can run based on any time, based on the schedule that you set. So these are very highly recommended, and to ensure you have a recent backup, you should make sure you set it to run at a regular time. So that's just something to go into. Obviously, if they have a backup, just check that you know everything is correct and looks how you would expect it to be. So we're going to move on to the third one. So this is about configuring 2-tier routing. So we can use single-tiered, but it's not really recommended. So to check this, you can go into networking and see if they've got any tier 1 gateways. Obviously, if they haven't, they're probably not using multi-tiered routing. So you can explain to them about single-tier and multi-tiered routing, obviously, depending at what level you're pitching it at and who you're speaking to and everything like that. But what they might not know is that in NSX, segments, these are called segments over here, and obviously the subnets are known as segments in this, so you can directly connect the tier 0 gateway to the segments, or if you're using multi-tiered routing, this obviously has tier 0 and tier 1 gateways, which allows admin total control over their respective services and policies. So your customer could ask you, why bother with 2-tier routing if I can just get everything using the single tier? So if they could ask you something like that, then there are some questions that you might want to ask them. So you might want to start with, do you want multiple tenants that need isolation? Do you want to give provider admins and tenant admins complete control over their services and policies? Do you want to use a cloud management platform, something like OpenStack, to deploy these tenants? And are you using NSX-T to provide networking and security for Kubernetes? Because if any of the answer is yes to those questions, then you should probably be using multi-tiered routing. And that's hopefully something that you can then steer them towards. So moving on to the fourth check. So this is about BDF, or bidirectional forwarding. So bidirectional forwarding is a routing protocol that can detect forwarding path failures. So one of the reasons obviously to use it is to use faster failure detection. So you can obviously check, have a conversation with them about whether they're using it or not. If they aren't, then you can show them how to do it. So you go into network settings, go into the BFD profile. I have one created here, but if you don't, then you obviously can go into add one. And then make sure you add values for the heartbeat interval and the declare dead multiple. So obviously I already have that, so I'm just going to exit out of there. And then you would go to your tier 0 gateway. And then we're going to go into edit that. And go down to routing and set this. Add one. And what should come up is the BFD profile that you've just created. And then obviously you'll just add in your BFD pip. So you can save that, as well as optionally you can also add in source addresses if you want to, and then you can show them that that's how easy it is to create a BFD profile in there. And obviously that's just if the switch supports BFD. So moving on to the next check. So this is about jumbo frames. So to start this, a minimum MTU of 1,600 is required. However, you can use 1,700 bytes to address the full possibility and future-proof the environment for use of like a Genevieve header. And the recommended MTU for the NVDS is 9,000, and the underlay network should obviously then at least support that value, excluding the overhead. So we can check that as well. I will just close the editing for this. So we're going to go into System, Fabric, Profiles, and load that up. And then you can look at the upcoming profiles and you can see the MTU for this and the MTU here as well. And then also you can go into the virtual machines and see the MTU there as well. So moving on to the next check. Okay, so getting into this, what this basically means is if a customer is using the load balancing services in NSX Manager, when they're configuring it, they should just start with a single load balancer and just start configuring the persistent profiles and the application profiles, and then they can scale out as needed, just to make it not too complicated to start with. So of course we can go in to check this. So we're going to go back into networking, look at the load balancing, and then you can see if they've created load balancers here or not, which obviously there are 3 created here. And then you go into the profiles and select the type of application profile that you want to use. So persistence, application, etc. And you can go into more detail if they aren't sure how to create a load balancer and why they might want one. So explain that it offers high availability services for applications and distributes the network traffic load amongst multiple servers, which obviously, so then it distributes the load in a way that's transparent to users. So then you can say that, you know, how to configure this if they aren't sure. So create the load balancer, attach it to a tier 1 logical router, set up health monitoring, configure the server pools, create a layer 4, a layer 7 virtual server, and then you can go in and start configuring the profiles. So I'm going to move on to the 7th check. Just quickly before I do, this is quite a good brief overview of, it's just a simple depiction of the components that you can configure and how they're set up. So it's just something nice for them to see. Sometimes visual representation is quite helpful. Okay, so this one's not too complicated at all. It's quite easy to check. So just make sure that they have a minimum of 2 edge nodes deployed. So you can go into System, Nodes, and then check the Edge transport nodes and check that they've got 2 there, and just explain why they should have a minimum of 2 edge nodes in there. So as you can see, some of them are quicker to go through, some of them aren't, and might require a little bit more explanation, but it obviously just depends on who you're talking to. So number 8, so this is revolving around tagging. So the reason you might use tagging is for more simple policy management. So you can go in and check this in your environment as well. So we are going to go in and check this. So you go to inventory and then you can look at the tags here. There are quite a lot of tags that are created in here, and you can see where these tags have been assigned to. So you can see that all these tags are assigned to an OpenShift. You can also then go in and check the VMs and see none of these do, but you can assign the tags in here as well to each virtual machine. Obviously that takes quite some time, so that's not as efficient way to do that, but hopefully with the new features coming in, this should be hopefully made a lot easier in the future. So I don't want to go on about too many checks. I'm sure you can look at these a lot in more detail if you want to look into these. So I'm just going to quickly go through the last 7. So obviously it's best practice to have at least 2 physical links to each NSX edge that's deployed as a VM. You can go into more detail about why that is. Traditional best practice in vSphere to have 4 vSphere hosts for host maintenance, capacity, verify the NSX controller cluster is elected a master. You can do this via the command line. You can look into the NSX manager system events if they're using VRNI, if they have it. If they don't, you can always explain why VRNI is a really helpful tool and stuff like that. The other thing I found this really helpful for, just in general doing this check, is it does promote a lot of different conversations with your customer. So you can really branch out into having different conversations, presenting to them on VRNI, explaining why it's so helpful and stuff like that. So you can go in and check the port mirroring, explain why that's helpful, to keep a close eye on network performance, alerts, etc. So it's easier to see when a problem occurs. Confirm that syslog is configured to log vRealize to vRealize log insight or other syslog servers or whatever they're using. And the last one, although it might seem quite obvious, is obviously really important to check their disk usage and evaluate the free available disk space. Just let them know where it's at, and make sure that they know obviously that's something to keep their eye on. So once you've been through all the checks, you can explain to them on the call or however you're doing it of what you thought of their system, of any improvements you might make. But I decided to put this into a different format. So I put this into a report. This is just a blank version of the report. So as you can see, I had an NSX component summary, I had the methodology of how I completed it, a general guidance about what I thought about their environment, some considerations that they could make. Obviously, I'm not going to tell them what to do, but they're just from the best practices and stuff like that. These are things that they could consider to look at in the future. And then next steps, obviously contacting the TAM to discuss any further feedback they might have, any sessions they might want revolving around what you've spoken to them about, things like that. So thank you very much for listening to me. These are some useful links that I thought might be helpful. So the first one is one of the other TAMs has very kindly let me write a blog on their website. So that blog post will be coming soon, all about the health check and a bit more detail around this. And of course, I found TechZone really helpful. It has a lot of info about security recommendations for NSX and things like that. So I'd be more than willing to help anyone who wanted any more information about doing their own manual best practice review, or if they wanted to help me do theirs. But thank you very much for listening. Does anyone have any questions? I see there's one.
Yeah, we got one in the Q&A. Jamie Kim wants to know, is this best practice inside Skyline report also?
It's not at the moment, but that is a really good idea to consider, obviously, now that Skyline has included NSX. And hopefully the other thing is that we're hoping very soon that there will actually be some tooling around doing best practice and health check reviews for this environment, so then you can use that tool. But this is just something in the meantime that if your customers were unsure about how they felt about their environment, if they created something new, they weren't sure if it matched up, it's just something that might help them feel more reassured, and as I said, build a conversation with your customers.
So I've noticed we have a lot of folks on the call today that are network and security TAMs, right? I would love to get everyone's opinion on not just the checks that we're doing, that Eleanor's done here, which appear to be more or less configuration of the NSX environment itself, right? Like how it's been stood up, configured. But I'd love to hear folks provide some, I guess, things that they always check for with their customers in regards to how they're actually using NSX. Like, okay, you're building your firewall policies this way. That's not a best practice. You should be doing it this way, right? So if anybody has any, specific thoughts around best practices as far as how to use NSX, I would love to hear some of those as well.
The apply to for rules, they really make sure that they're using the apply to properly.
Yeah, what Jim said.
And that limits the scope, right, of where.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep,
Steve, right. Yeah. So the rules go just to them, to the machines that are part of the apply to versus the rules going across the entire board.
Excellent. That's a good one. Anybody else got anything?
Yeah, additionally, on the edges, there's a lot of confusion in the field around the edges. I think that the network and security TAM team would be more than willing to sit down and try and draft a best practice or find a best practice that you can make sure that you apply to all cases of the edges.
So I guess I have a question for everyone on the call. So Eleanor, one of the items you were checking was the single tier routing versus multi-tier routing, right? Going
Yeah.
directly to the T0. What would be a good use case to actually just do that? Does anybody have any
What would
thoughts?
be a good use case for just using single tier routing?
Yes. Or should customers just always do multi-tier, and because it sets them up for success in the future if things change, right?
I think multi-tiered is the best way to go, but using a single-tiered routing for a smaller network, one that you're testing or something like that, I think that's a good use case for it. If you don't want to start getting involved with tier one, or you're new to this and you're just starting to take a look at it, I think that's a good use case for it.
Okay.
If you're on an older version of NSX-T and you have to do multicast, it's only available on the T0.
Yeah.
So that might be another instance where you're just doing something with T0, or you just a small number of networks.
So one thing to add, Steve, I think customers might not be aware that if they own NSX, that also comes with a license for Log Insight to manage that NSX environment. So some of the checks that Eleanor was showing around backups and stuff, I believe that if you download and install Log Insight and leverage the NSX-T content pack, you know, they could take the findings that Eleanor has here and set alarms in the future to make sure once they've remediated it, it doesn't then kind of drift again in the future. And if it does, they can get an alarm for it.
Oh yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah,
that multicast comment that Jim made, most people probably when Jim said it goes, oh yeah, my customers don't use multicast. As we recently found out, there can be a wide variety of clients that use multicast and you don't even know they're using it, particularly if you run some of the Apple products. If, say, that customer was a big Apple shop, guaranteed they're going to be doing multicast. So it's something that is worth paying attention to, particularly up front when you start architecting.
Yeah, and the customer that Dale's referring to is we kind of learned it when we put Verni in place. So another product to help you analyze the environment as well.
Excellent. Anybody else got anything? We'll make it a short session today. All right. Well, thanks again, Eleanor, for doing this. Oh, go ahead, Dale.
Actually, there's one question in the Q&A from Alec. He wants to know, is there a blog resource I can check to help a customer with automating NSX-T backups?
Yeah, there's actually quite a lot of documentation on, especially even on the VMware documents. There's quite a lot of information on how to set up automated backups and how you might schedule that.
Great.
I can send that to you if you'd like to take a look at that.
Yeah, that'd be great. Alrighty. Well, thanks everyone for joining, and thanks again, Eleanor. This has been fantastic. So I'll let everybody go. Have a great rest of your week and a good weekend.
Thank you.
All right, take care.